Thank you, Walter Brueggemann. In my imagination, I think that being thanked for his prophetic life and teaching is not something that Walter Brueggemann would think that he should be thanked for. But here I am, deeply grateful to this man. Greetings. This is another installment in Hiding in Plain Sight, a podcast from Subversive Preacher about the sacred in the field all around us at every moment, if only we have the eyes and the ears to apprehend it. Today's episode is a slight interruption in what was planned because one of my heroes has died. I don't have that many heroes, but Walter Brueggemann was chief among them. He taught me how to pierce my assumptions and become open to new meanings, new insights, new beginnings. And just that one thing is a value beyond measure. And there are many other gifts as well. You see, I came out of seminary poorly formed, almost unformed from an ecclesiastical point of view. I also came out of seminary a drunk and a drug user, so anyone taking bets back then probably wouldn't have given me good odds. But by the grace of God, I got sober, and within a couple of years, I encountered Walter Brueggemann for the first time. One of the malformations of my early ministry was that I didn't have much respect for preaching. I didn't think people listened to the preacher. I rarely did. And so, like having the Bible read over and over and over again at people on Sunday morning, I assumed that people felt imprisoned in a captive audience before the preacher. But when I discovered that people were actually listening and even hearing some of the things I said, I went to the College of Preachers at the National Cathedral to learn how to do it. And I immediately fell in love with the place and the idea that preaching could matter. Now, in my second or third visit, I spent a week listening to Walter Brueggemann for the first time, and I was totally blown away. There is so much to say about the man, but I will limit myself to just these two insights for which I am grateful to him beyond words. But this isn't just personal. I think it'll be of interest to you too. First, he taught me to take the text seriously. In the 1980s heyday of Jerry Falwell and the moral majority, the idea of taking the text literally was anathema. I mean, it was stupid, idiotic, an excuse to dictate moralism. But Brueggemann, he challenged us to read the text literally, by which he meant, unlike biblical literalists, to read through the layers of Christian doctrine and theology that had covered over the text. Read what the prophets said, and to whom they said it, and about what, and what church teachers and preachers, not about what church teachers and preachers have said they were saying. Well, I began to understand that rather than a bunch of gobbledygook from an old book swung like a hammer by those who judge and condemn whatever they don't like in society, that those ancient voices, they were poets. Yeah, they were poets whispering across time to us. In fact, Brueggemann's most popular book, I think, is probably Prophetic Imagination, in which he unleashes the poetry of the prophets. And so too the follow-up book, Finally Comes the Poet. So the thing I most associate with Brueggemann in terms of his impact on me was the little throwaway line that really changed my life. Anyone who has heard me preach over time knows about this reframing too. Most of the college preacher time was spent visiting with the scholars in a sort of seminar session. But Brueggemann preached to us once during that week, that first week, and then sat down and invited our responses. Now, I don't remember the text that he preached from, but it was apocalyptic. The part of his sermon was about eschatology. I could only think of Pentecostal preachers and end of the world doomsdayers. And so I was generally confused by this man, this prophet, I believed, who was telling me I had to have an eschatology. That's what he was talking about. That preachers needed an eschatology. Now let me stop and fill in these two words, apocalyptic and eschatology. Eschatology is an element of theology concerned with the destiny of the world, of humankind. What happens eventually at the end? Is there an end? Does the end render meaning on the beginning or the present? Those kind of questions are eschatological. To describe something as apocalyptic means that it is forecasting that finality, or even declaring that the end is imminent. Now, I mention those because they often get confused and conflated. They're not the same, and all I will say about apocalyptic is that it's not ours to see or know. Eschatology, however, turns out to be important. Anyway, after that sermon many years ago, and we were all sitting in the refectory at the College of Preachers, with participants asking questions of Brueggemann, who was holding forth with long, profound, and wordy responses. I raised my hand from the back of the room, which is where I always like to sit. And I said, I don't understand. Carl Sagan has given us a glimpse of the cosmos and our teeny tiny speck of a dust place in it. We know that our sun will eventually end up a cinder out in the darkness of space and the earth will die with it. It's not God, it's just the cosmos. How can you have an eschatology when we know all of that? Well, Brueggemann, as I remember, cocked his head and said, well, extending that word as only he could with his gravelly voice. You can see the universe through Carl Sagan's lens, or you can see it through Isaiah's lens. That's all he said. The man of many words gave my question just that little handful. And then he went on, as if he had answered my existential challenge in some meaningful way. I was like hugely disappointed. Now, this is how slow I am. It wasn't until I was driving back to Indianapolis that it hit me. Carl Sagan's lens is really no more a given than Isaiah's lens. And perhaps they're really not all that different anyway. You see, for instance, I believe that the Christian martyr imprisoned and hanged by the Nazis just before the end of the war, Dietrich Bonhoeffer, became a kind of Christian existentialist in the end. And that the existentialist atheist, Albert Camus, became a kind of Christian at the end. Both became undeclared Christian existentialists because the Nazis and the Holocaust crystallized the absurdity of all of our previous theological claims. And yet in that darkness, it became incumbent upon us, humankind, to declare a meaning that we would then move towards. And that's why the line in Jesus' prayer is so compelling to me. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. That's our task. That's our mission. That's our meaning. That is our eschatology. So the aha I took from Brueggemann is that we all have a lens, and more particularly a primary lens among the many others that we wear. None of us knows the truth. No one. We're not God. And even the most precious science and technology that will ever be known to humankind will not make us God. There are questions, eschatological questions, we don't get to know the answer to. And so we must choose the lens through which we will apprehend the cosmos and life within it. What meaning we declare has little to do with facts and data. Rather, it has to do with the poetic imagination with which we filter the facts and the data. Walter Brueggemann died at the age of 92 this past week. His last years were spent, coincidentally, in a part of the world that was formative to me, Traverse City, Michigan. All of which caused me to feel the need to thank him publicly and to let you know about him if you don't already. Because I think of Walter Brueggemann this way. 2.5 millennia ago, there were these Hebrew prophets that appeared somewhat out of nowhere. An element of the axial age in which Socrates, Plato, Aristotle, Buddha, and Lao Tzu also arrived. They changed the human mind, the frame or the lenses through which our species began to perceive the world. As Brueggemann says, the Hebrew prophets were uncredentialed. They likely were illiterate. Their poems were heard and written down because they were so powerful to those who heard them. But no one, I imagine, suspected that 2,500 years later, we would still be hearing and reading their words. Surely they would be shocked. Well, if human beings are around in 2,500 years from now, and someone uncovers the writings of a prophet from the 20th century named Walter Brueggemann, they will be in awe as they study his prophetic imagination. They will suspect God had something to do with it, to do with him. So do I. I will close today with reading a bit of an interview Krista Tippett did with Walter Brueggemann way back in 2011, some of which sounds like it could have been today. Now you can hear the whole thing online just by putting "On Being Interview with Krista Tippett" in your browser. So here's an excerpt just to whet your thirst. From On Being with Krista Tippett, December 22nd, 2011. Now Tippett here has asked Walter Brueggemann to read a passage from the prophets that has been especially meaningful to him over the years, and he reads two, and I've excerpted from those responses, because Brueggemann was, as I've said, not known for brevity. In fact, I once heard him begin an after-dinner lecture by saying he had 27 points, and he actually did go through 27 points. So anyway, Mr. Brueggemann. Since the prophets characteristically revolved around judgment and hope, I'll do two passages, one of each of them. The judgment passage that I'll read is Jeremiah 4, and it goes like this. I looked, and you don't know who I is. I looked on the earth, and lo, it was made waste and void, and to the heavens, and they had no light. I looked to the mountains, and lo, they were quaking, and at the hills moved to and fro. I looked, and lo, there was no one at all, and all the birds of the air had fled. I looked, and lo, the fruitful land was a desert, and all its cities laid waste before his fierce finger. Brueggemann. You get the I looked, and what that text really is creation reversal. You go from heaven and earth to mountains to birds to humans. He's describing it all being taken away one at a time. When I hear that kind of poetry, I get chill bumps because it seems to me so contemporary that I think that's how very many people are now experiencing the world. It's as though the ordered world is being taken away from us, and it's just so powerfully exquisite. And then Brueggemann goes on to say, the other text I'll read is Isaiah 43. It's a very much used passage. Quote, do not remember the former things, nor consider the things of old. I am about to do a new thing. Now it springs forth. Do you perceive it? And apparently what Isaiah is telling people is just forget about the Exodus, forget about all the ancient miracles, and pay attention to the new miracles and rebirth and new creation that God is enacting before your very eyes. I often wonder when I read that, what was it like the day the poet got those words? What did it feel like, and how did he share that? Of course, we don't know any of that, so it just keeps ringing in our ears. Miss Tippett says, you and I were together this morning at a gathering of preachers. I think that both of those themes that you named, of what feels like chaos but then hope, the fact that we don't know how the world is going to be structured differently or what will survive that we recognize makes it stressful, even if it's hopeful. Mr. Brueggemann, that's right. But the amazing contemporaneity of this material is that the issues are the same, that the world we have trusted in is vanishing before our eyes, and the world that is coming at us feels like a threat to us. We can't quite see the shape of it. I think that's where the church and the preachers of the church have to live. People don't much want to hear either one of those words, that the world is vanishing or that the world is coming to us, which is why this kind of poetry always leaves us uneasy. Miss Tippett. But I think that you also, but I think that you also think that that unease is a holy thing or can be a holy thing. That in fact, the Bible calls the faithful not just to settle and be comfortable. Mr. Brueggemann, I think that's exactly right. Miss Tippett, that's countercultural though. Mr. Brueggemann, it is countercultural because our consumer culture wants somehow to narcoticize us so that we just settle in on things. I think that Kafka maybe said that a poet or a novelist is like a pickaxe that attacks the way we've got things arranged. And I think these poems are like pickaxes that are not welcome among us. But we're going to miss out on the reality of our life if we're narcoticized, both about the loss and about the newness. Well, that's just a little Brueggemann to get you interested and to listen to the interview on being with Krista Tippett, or even to get some of his books and read them. The scholar, the preacher, the teacher, the prophet, Walter Brueggemann died this week. And the silence of the cosmos grew just a pinch louder and a pinch larger. Thank you. Thank you, Walter Brueggemann. Thank you for listening, tuning in to this part of the subversive preacher matrix of columns, sermons, and podcasts. I really appreciate it. And as always,